Dear friends, for the last month of my sabbatical, I was at the Tantur Ecumenical Institute, and that institute is about 7 kilometers south of Jerusalem, and it's on a hill that overlooks Bethlehem, so it's quite close to Bethlehem. And so when you go to meals, the dining room, you have these wonderful windows open looking out over that city of Bethlehem, where in so many ways, our faith takes root, comes alive for us. But as you sit there eating very nice meals, I must say, you notice immediately a big concrete wall around Bethlehem, separating Bethlehem, the city, in Palestinian territory from the rest of Israel. I want to show you a picture of that wall now. So I took this photograph standing on the Israeli side, and I'm looking towards Bethlehem. You can see where those flags are. There's a tower there, and you can see the wall. That complex there is the entrance, the gate, the checking of passports and security control to get from Israel into Palestinian territory. Perhaps you might see the wall better in the next photograph. So again, I'm from the same place. I've just taken it from a different angle. There you see the wall, wrapping itself around the city, and Bethlehem behind it there. You can't go anywhere in the Holy Land without coming across such walls and barriers and controls. They are everywhere. And along with those barriers and controls are armed soldiers all over the place. What are these about? Well, of course, we know that this conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has been going on for years and years and years. At its basis, I suppose, is whose land is it? Whose land is it? But these sorts of walls come because people are suspicious, people are fearful, people hate, people want to exclude and isolate other people. Of course, we know that many Jews believe that the land is theirs, that God has given them that land. They are a chosen people and have a special divine right to that land. The problem is that they believe that even at the expense of those people who are indigenous to the land. And the Palestinians are indigenous to the land. This should sound familiar to us, shouldn't it? You know, those are the sorts of ideas we heard during apartheid, aren't they? That white peoples in some way benefited or had a greater right to the land, even at the expense of the indigenous people. So we are familiar with that sort of thing, that mindset, that attitude of isolation and exclusion, of separation, of hate, of suspicion, of fear. But we have learned, hopefully we have learned in South Africa, maybe we're still learning, maybe it's a process, but we know that racism has absolutely no place. That one race, one group, is never superior to another group. And tribalism, of course, which is a type of racism, also has no place. It too is racist. And it is completely contrary to the mind of God. It's completely contrary to any scriptures, even though sometimes, like we did in South Africa, use scriptures to justify it, just as the Jews are using it to justify what's happening there now. That's not scriptural. If we go back to the 12th chapter of the book of Genesis, when God chooses Abram, who becomes Abraham, and asks him to go to that land, he gives him that land and says, go there. He goes not because he is worthy and good and special, not because he's better than anybody else. He goes because he said yes. If he had said no to God, God would have chosen somebody else. Abram wasn't different and special. He wasn't better than anyone else. He just said yes. And so we must be careful of believing and jumping into this thought pattern that somehow certain people, certain groups are special. If we look at our first reading from the second book of Kings this morning, we will hear that wonderful story of the prophet Elisha meeting this woman who makes him very welcome. She builds walls, but she builds different kinds of walls. She builds walls that include and embrace and welcome. She builds a room for the prophet on her house. She welcomed this stranger. Having spent a month in the Holy Land, and perhaps those of you who've been there, you might remember that the Holy Land is a harsh place. It's hot. It is really hot. One day last week I was at 38 degrees. That's hot. It's harsh. And people in the time of Elisha, the time of Jesus, they didn't have motor cars. They walked everywhere in these hot, harsh conditions, and it took them a long time. And also there were no Holiday Inns and Airbnbs or whatever, hotels along the way. They needed to be welcomed. They couldn't have made the journey without people welcoming them and helping them and offering hospitality to them. It was normal, it was expected that they would find some sort of shelter, some sort of care along their journey from strangers, and those who lived along the way expected to welcome strangers. If you look at the gospel as well, Matthew's gospel, it's quite clear from our gospel today that we are being warned against holding on to the things that we want and desire. That we're to let go of our self-interest and be alert and aware of those around us, to be welcoming, to be open, to be hospitable, even to those we don't know, the stranger. Dear friends, if we look at our country, we look at other parts of the world too, we see a really corrupt, crime-ridden, difficult society. And we might be tempted, and there may be some real value in being careful and having some sort of protection and being a bit wary and alert. But we must remember, as we do those things, as we build our walls, as we put up electric fences, they might be important and they might be helpful, but we also must remember what they do to us. They do isolate us. They do separate us one from another. They do in some ways add to our suspicions and fears. And we must be aware of that. And I wonder too, as we think of that, do we bring those attitudes, do we bring them into this community? Perhaps we do. Perhaps we come a little suspicious of one another, a little afraid, a little bit weary. We keep people at a distance. We hide behind these walls that we create. But that cannot be the attitude of Catholic Christians. We are challenged by today's readings to move beyond those walls that we build and create, even in our hearts and in our minds. You know, I've been a priest now nearly 18 years, and I've heard over and over again, "Oh, Father, there are cliques in parishes." And over these 18 years, I'm pretty convinced that 9 times out of 10, that's a load of nonsense. We see a group of people and we say they're a clique, and it excuses us from going to them. We can say safely away and blame them. I often ask those who say, "That's a clique, Father, they don't want me." I say, have you been to ask them if they want you? If you can join their group? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, no, Father. They're hiding. They're hiding behind walls. They've put up a barrier in their minds and said, well, that group is different to me. I'm afraid of that group. I don't want to go. And how often do we do that? There are no cliques if we make the effort to learn one another's names, recognize Christ in one another. If we can't build real community here, if we're going to have attitudes of fear and suspicion, how can we build a community of God? And more than that, how can we then go out to others? If we can't go out to one another, how do we go out to the world to share that love of God? And so tearing down walls must start here, in this Eucharist, but also in the activities of our parish community. Are we willing to participate and be involved and share and get to know one another? Here is where we should be learning what real community is and how we can transform our own lives and the lives of those around us. Dear friends, my travels over this past year have shown me that, yes, walls exist here in South Africa, but they exist everywhere. Our world is like that. And so our whole world is in need of something different. Our church is in need of something different. This whole synod process is exactly what the Pope is trying to do. Are we listening to one another? Are we sharing with one another? Are we creating space and time for one another? Let's try and commit to do that in this place. Are we willing to do it? Are you? Am I? Are we willing to be challenged by God, to be used by God, to create a world, a church, where there are no walls?